My name's Matt, I'm 36, and I live in Chicago. I work as a mechanical engineer, the kind of job that keeps me busy but also lets me enjoy my downtime. I'm not one for drama, but life clearly had other plans for me. I met my wife, Claire, about 10 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party. She was smart, funny, and had this energy that could light up any room. Claire teaches literature at a local college, and she's always had a passion for her work. It's one of the things I admired most about her dedication, her love for teaching. We dated for a couple of years before getting married. For a while, everything seemed perfect. We traveled, built a life together, and even talked about starting a family someday. Sure, we had our disagreements, but nothing that ever felt like a real threat to our relationship. But over the past year, something started to shift. Claire became more distant, more preoccupied. She started working late more often, claiming she had to help struggling students or attend faculty meetings. I didn't think much of it at first. She's always been dedicated to her job. But the late nights became more frequent, and when she was home, she was glued to her phone, texting or grading papers, until late at night. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a busy semester, but deep down, I knew something was off. It was like she was there, but not really there, you know? The warmth, the connection we once had, felt like it was slipping through my fingers, and I had no idea why. Little did I know, the truth was far worse than I could have imagined. The turning point came on a random Thursday evening, one of those nights when Claire claimed she had a late meeting with her department. I wasn't suspicious at first. This had become the norm. But when she left, she forgot her laptop at home, something she never did. Claire's whole life was in that laptop, lesson plans, student work, everything. So, when I saw it sitting on the kitchen counter, something inside me told me to look. I wrestled with the idea for a while. I'm not the snooping type. I'd always believed in giving people their privacy, especially Claire. But the distance between us had been gnawing at me, and something about that night felt different. So, I opened it first. I told myself I'd just check her calendar, see if there really was a faculty meeting. But curiosity, or maybe it was intuition, got the better of me. I opened her email. What I found shattered everything. There were dozens of emails between Claire and someone named Evan. At first, I thought it was just a colleague, maybe a fellow professor. But the tone of the emails quickly made it clear that Evan wasn't just a coworker. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. You're the only reason I even look forward to class anymore. I hate sneaking around, but it's kind of exciting, don't you think? My stomach dropped. I kept scrolling, hoping, praying that I was misunderstanding. But there it was, plain as day. Evan wasn't a colleague. He was a student. A student in one of her classes. And their relationship had been going on for months. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. How could she do this? How could the woman I'd built a life with betray me like this, and with someone she was supposed to be teaching, mentoring? The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was professional, ethical. It was everything. I closed the laptop and sat there in silence, trying to process what I'd just seen. My mind raced with questions. Had she ever loved me? Was this the first time? How long had she been lying to my face? But the worst part wasn't the questions, it was the answers I knew I'd never get. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in the living room, staring at the door, waiting for her to come home. And when she finally did, I knew things would never be the same. I'll never forget the sound of the door unlocking that night. It was almost surreal, like hearing it from outside my own body. Claire walked in, humming to herself, dropping her keys into the little dish by the door like she always did. She had no idea what was waiting for her in the living room. No idea that everything was about to come crashing down. She spotted me immediately, sitting there in the dim light, and her smile faltered just a little. "Hey, you're still up?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but there was a slight edge to her voice. Maybe she could sense something was off. Or maybe she just didn't expect me to confront her head-on that I didn't answer right away. I just stared at her, feeling the weight of everything I'd discovered pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. My heart was pounding, but my mind was eerily calm. I knew there was no turning back from this moment. "Where were you tonight, Claire?" I finally asked, my voice steady but cold. She blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I told you, I had a faculty meeting." "Why?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was the kind of laugh that comes when you're standing at the edge of something you can't believe is happening. I reached over to the coffee table and grabbed her laptop, holding it up for her to see. "You forgot this," I said quietly. And I guess curiosity got the better of me. Her face drained of color in an instant. She knew. She knew exactly what I'd found. "Matt, I can explain," she stammered, taking a step toward me, but I held up my hand to stop her. "Explain what, Claire?" I snapped, my voice rising. "That you've been sneaking around with a student? That the woman I married has been lying to my face for months?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The silence between us was deafening. It was like all the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving nothing but the cold, hard truth. Finally, she tried to recover. "It's not what you think, Matt. Evan and it's complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, incredulous. "No, Claire, it's really not. You're a married woman who's having an affair with someone you're supposed to be teaching. That's not complicated. That's betrayal." She looked away, her jaw tightening. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, that she might finally show some shred of remorse. But instead, she crossed her arms and glared at me. "You don't get it, Matt," she hissed. "You've been so wrapped up in your own world, your work, your routines." I felt like I was invisible. Evan made me feel alive again. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. So it was my fault now? I'd been blindsided, but now she was trying to turn the blame on me. "I was working to build a life for us, Claire," I shot back. "I was here, committed, thinking we were in this together. And you? You were off playing out some fantasy with a kid half your age." That stung. I could see it in her eyes. But I didn't care. She deserved to feel every ounce of the pain she'd caused me. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other across the living room. The place that had once been the heart of our home, now just a battlefield of broken trust. Finally, I spoke, my voice low but firm. "I want you out. Pack your things and leave. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here." Her eyes widened, like she hadn't expected me to actually kick her out. Maybe she thought I'd beg her to stay, or that we'd somehow work through this. But there was no coming back from this. The woman I thought I knew was gone. "You're overreacting," she muttered, grabbing her purse. "We can talk about this tomorrow when you've calmed down." I shook my head, feeling the finality of it all settle in my chest. "There's nothing to talk about. We're done." And just like that, she was gone. The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone in the silence of our shattered life. That I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, waiting for the reality of it all to sink in. But it didn't feel real. It felt like I was watching someone else's life fall apart, not mine. Eventually, I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. The anger was still there, burning hot and fierce, but beneath it was something even worse, a deep, aching sadness that felt like it might swallow me whole. This wasn't just about Claire cheating. It was about the future we'd planned, the life we'd built, the trust one thought was unbreakable. It was all gone, and for the first time in my life, I had no idea what to do next. The morning after Claire left felt like waking up in the middle of a nightmare I couldn't escape. The apartment was eerily quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that settles in your bones, reminding you that something is missing. Or in my case, someone that I barely slept, just laid there staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation over and over in my head. Her words echoed in my mind. Evan made me feel alive again. That one sentence felt like a knife twisting in my chest. As if everything we'd built together wasn't enough. As if I hadn't been enough. That I finally dragged myself out of bed around 7 a.m., not because I felt rested, but because I couldn't stand lying there any longer. The coffee maker sputtered to life, filling the kitchen with the familiar smell, but even that felt off. I used to love our mornings together, sitting at the table, sharing quiet conversations before we both headed off to work. But now? Now the silence was suffocating. That I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the mug in my hands, wondering how I was supposed to go back to normal. How do you go to work, chat with coworkers, pretend like your life hasn't just imploded overnight? The answer is you don't. You just fake it. And that's exactly what I did. That I showed up at the office, plastered on the most convincing smile I could muster, and powered through the day like nothing was wrong. But every time someone asked, "How's Claire?" or any fun weekend plans with the wife, it felt like I was being punched in the gut all over again. By the time I got home, the weight of it all came crashing back. The empty apartment felt like a graveyard of memories. Her shoes were still by the door, her favorite blanket draped over the couch, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a couple of trash bags and started packing up her stuff. Not because I was ready to let go, but because I couldn't breathe with her presence still all around me. Her clothes, her books, the little knickknacks she'd collected over the years, they all went into bags. It felt like I was erasing her, piece by piece, but I knew it was the only way I'd survive this. As I was stuffing her things into the bags, I found an old photo album tucked away in the back of our closet. It was from our honeymoon in Italy. Smiling faces, sun-drenched landscapes, moments frozen in time when I thought we were happy. I sat on the floor, flipping through the pages, feeling the weight of those memories crash over me. How could something that once felt so real turn out to be a lie? That night, I finally let myself fall apart. The anger, the sadness, the betrayal, it all came flooding out. I yelled, I cried, I punched a pillow like it would somehow absorb the pain. And when there was nothing left, just an empty, hollow ache in my chest, I realized something: that I couldn't stay in this place physically or emotionally. If I was going to move forward, I had to rebuild my life from the ground up. The next few days were a blur of logistics. I called a lawyer, started the paperwork for the divorce. It felt surreal, hearing the words, irreconcilable differences, come out of my mouth like I was describing someone else's life. But it wasn't someone else's life, it was mine. Friends and family reached out when they found out, offering their sympathy, their support. But even their kind words felt hollow. Because no matter how many people told me I'd be okay, it didn't feel that way. Not yet. The real turning point came a week later when Jake, my best friend since college, showed up at my door with a six-pack and that no-nonsense look he always gets when he knows I'm spiraling. "All right, man," he said, plopping down on the couch. "You've had your time to wallow. Now it's time to get your life back." I wanted to argue, to tell him he didn't get it. But deep down, I knew he was right. I couldn't let Claire's betrayal define me. I couldn't let her affair be the thing that broke me. So, I started small. I went back to the gym, picked up my old hobbies, things I'd let fall by the wayside when life got comfortable, when I stopped prioritizing me. I even started cooking again, something I used to love before dinners turned into rushed meals and awkward silences. But the biggest change? I started rediscovering who I was without Claire. For so long, my identity had been wrapped up in our marriage, in being Matt and Claire. But now, I had to figure out who just Matt was. And as scary as that was, it was also liberating. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were days when the sadness hit out of nowhere, like when I found an old movie ticket in a jacket pocket or heard a song on the radio that reminded me of her. But those moments didn't break me. They were just reminders of a chapter that was over, and slowly but surely, I started to feel like me again. The thing about healing is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's not like flipping a switch where one day you're broken and the next you're fine. It comes in waves. Some days, I felt like I was making progress getting up early, hitting the gym, focusing on work. But other days, the weight of everything hit me like a ton of bricks, and I'd find myself sitting on the couch, staring at the wall, wondering how the hell my life had turned into this mess. But slowly, the good days started to outnumber the bad. One of the first big steps I took was redecorating the apartment. It might sound trivial, but there's something powerful about reclaiming your space. I painted the walls a fresh color, bought new furniture, and even swapped out the old photos for pictures of places I wanted to visit and things that inspired me. It wasn't just about changing the look of the apartment, it was about creating an environment that reflected me, not the ghost of a life I thought I had with Claire. Jake kept dragging me out of the house, too. He refused to let me sit around and stew in my thoughts. At first, it felt forced, going to bars, meeting new people, pretending to be social when all I wanted to do was hide. But over time, I started to enjoy it. I realized I'd been living in a bubble for so long, and now I was finally stepping out into the world again. One night, Jake convinced me to go to this local trivia night at a bar downtown. It was the kind of thing I used to enjoy but hadn't done in years. We grabbed a table near the back, ordered a couple of beers, and joined in. Halfway through the night, I noticed a woman sitting at the bar, laughing with her friends. She had this effortless confidence about her, nothing flashy, just genuine. Our eyes met for a brief second, and she smiled that I didn't think much of it at the time. I wasn't looking to jump into anything new. But life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. A few weeks later, I ran into her again, this time at a coffee shop. I was picking up my usual order, and there she was, standing in line ahead of me. She turned around, and we recognized each other instantly. "Trivia night, right?" she said with a grin that I chuckled. "Yeah, that's me, the guy who couldn't answer a single question about 80s movies." She laughed, and just like that, the conversation flowed effortlessly. Her name was Lena, and she had this easygoing vibe that made me feel comfortable right away. It wasn't forced, it wasn't complicated, it was just nice. That we ended up grabbing coffee together, and before I knew it, we were talking about everything from our favorite books to the worst jobs we'd ever had. It felt good to connect with someone without all the baggage, without the weight of my past hanging over every word. But even as things with Lena started to unfold, I was cautious. The scars from Claire's betrayal were still fresh, and trust didn't come easily. There were moments when I'd catch myself overthinking, wondering if Lena was being honest, if I was reading too much into things, if I was setting myself up to be hurt again. But I reminded myself that Lena wasn't Claire. And more importantly, I wasn't the same person I was back then. As the weeks went by, I realized something profound. Claire's betrayal had broken me, yes, but it had also rebuilt me. It forced me to confront parts of myself I'd ignored for years. It pushed me out of my comfort zone and showed me that I was capable of standing on my own 2 feet, that I wasn't defined by what happened to me. I was defined by how I chose to rise from it. One evening, I found myself back at that same coffee shop where Lena and I had first reconnected. I was sitting by the window, watching the world go by. When it hit me, I was happy. Not the fleeting kind of happiness that comes from distractions or temporary fixes, but the deep, lasting kind that comes from knowing you've been through the worst and come out stronger on the other side. Claire was a chapter in my story, but she wasn't the whole book. Her betrayal was a plot twist I never saw coming, but it didn't define my ending. I did. That realization was freeing. It allowed me to let go of the anger, the resentment, the what-ifs. It allowed me to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that no matter what came my way, I had the strength to face it. And as I sat there, sipping my coffee, I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. It's funny how life has this way of moving forward even when you feel like you're standing still. One minute, everything's falling apart, and the next, you're piecing together a new version of yourself, almost without realizing it. That's how it felt in the months after Claire left. I didn't wake up one day magically healed, but bit by bit, the pieces started fitting together in a way they hadn't before. Things with Lena were going well. It wasn't a whirlwind romance or some fairy tale rebound. It was something better, steady, real, and grounded in mutual respect. We took our time, not rushing into labels or expectations. It felt good to be with someone who saw me for who I was now, not who I used to be with Claire. But even as things with Lena grew, I couldn't shake the occasional fear that I was dragging the past into my present. Trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild itself overnight. There were times I'd find myself questioning her intentions, even when she'd given me no reason to doubt her. When she'd cancel plans last minute or seem distracted, my mind would spiral back to those nights Claire had done the same. I hated that I felt that way, but the wounds were still there, even if they were starting to scar over. One night, after we'd been seeing each other for a few months, Lena and I were sitting on my couch, sharing a bottle of wine and flipping through old vinyl records. She picked up one of Claire's favorites, Fleetwood Mac. My stomach twisted, not because of the music itself, but because of the memories attached to it. Lena must have noticed the shift in my expression because she set the record down and turned to me. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. That I hesitated, wondering if I should brush it off, but I realized in that moment that if I wanted this to work, I had to be honest, not just with her, but with myself. "It's complicated," I admitted. "That album, it belonged to Claire. We used to listen to it all the time." I took a breath, trying to find the right words. "Sometimes, it feels like I'm dragging all this baggage into what we have, and I hate that. I hate that I still think about her, even when I don't want to." Lena didn't flinch. She didn't get defensive or pull away. She just nodded, her eyes meeting mine with this quiet understanding. "Matt," she said gently, "you're not dragging anything into this. Healing isn't linear. You don't have to pretend like the past didn't happen. I'm not asking you to forget her. I'm just asking you to let me be me in your life, not a replacement." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they were harsh, but because they were exactly what I needed to hear. I didn't have to erase the past to move forward, I just had to make room for something new. That conversation marked a turning point for me. It wasn't just about trusting Lena, it was about trusting myself again. Trusting that I could navigate this new chapter without letting the shadows of the past dictate my every move. Around the same time, something unexpected happened at work. My boss called me into his office and offered me a promotion, a chance to lead a new project that would require traveling to different cities for a few months at a time. It was the kind of opportunity one would have jumped at before, but now, it felt like a crossroads. That I talked it over with Lena, wondering if the distance would be too much. But she surprised me again with her response. "Go," she said without hesitation. "This is your life, Matt. Don't hold back because of me. We'll figure it out." And that's when I realized just how much I'd grown. A year ago, I would have clung to familiarity, afraid to take risks after everything I'd lost. But now I felt ready to step into the unknown. That I accepted the promotion and started traveling for work. The change of scenery was exactly what I needed. Being in new cities, meeting new people, it reminded me that the world was bigger than the pain I'd been carrying. I found inspiration in unexpected places, from quiet coffee shops to bustling city streets. I even started documenting my travels through photography, something I'd always loved but never pursued seriously. But no matter where I went, Lena and I stayed connected. Late-night phone calls, spontaneous visits when our schedules aligned. It wasn't easy, but it felt worth it. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't running from something, I was running towards something. One evening, while I was in Seattle for a project, I found myself standing at the edge of Puget Sound, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The water reflected the fiery colors of the sky, and in that moment, I felt this overwhelming sense of peace, not because everything was perfect, but because I was finally at peace with the imperfection. That I thought about Claire, about the life we'd built and lost, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons, for the growth, for the chance to rebuild myself into someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient. When I returned home a few weeks later, Lena was waiting for me at the airport. As I walked toward her, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Hope for the future, for whatever came next, because I knew I was ready for it. We spent the evening catching up, sharing stories from our time apart, and as we sat on the balcony of my apartment, looking out over the city lights, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about surviving heartbreak. It was about thriving beyond it. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. But I'd learned that perfection wasn't the goal. Growth was. Resilience was. Finding joy in the messiness of it all, that's what mattered. As I held Lena's hand, feeling the steady beat of my own heart finally in sync with the world around me, I knew one thing for sure: the past was behind me, but the best parts of my story were still ahead. By the time autumn rolled in, bringing with it the crisp air and changing leaves, my life felt like it had finally settled into something resembling balance. Not the kind of balance where everything is perfectly aligned, but the kind where you've accepted the messiness and learned to dance with it. Work was thriving. The new role kept me busy, traveling to cities I'd only ever dreamed of visiting. Each trip felt like another chapter in this new life I was building, one where I wasn't defined by the weight of betrayal, but by the strength I'd found in picking up the pieces. Every city, every project, was a reminder that I was capable of more than I'd ever given myself credit for, but as fulfilling as work was, it was what was happening back home that really grounded me. Things with Lena had grown into something deeper than I'd anticipated. It wasn't just about having someone to fill the empty spaces Claire left behind. It was about sharing my life with someone who truly got me. We didn't rush anything. There were no grand declarations or sweeping gestures. Instead, there were quiet mornings spent sipping coffee together, late-night conversations about our dreams and fears, and the simple comfort of knowing that no matter where I was in the world, I had someone to come back to. But even with all that, I'd be lying if I said the ghosts of the past didn't occasionally rear their heads. Trust is a tricky thing once it's been broken, even when you're with someone who's done nothing to deserve your doubts. There were moments when I'd catch myself overthinking, wondering if I was setting myself up to be hurt again. One evening, after a long day of work, Lena and I were sitting on the couch, watching some random movie neither of us was really paying attention to. I noticed her phone light up with a message, and for a split second, that old familiar knot tightened in my stomach. It was irrational, I knew it, but the scars from Claire's betrayal still lingered. Lena must have sensed my tension because she turned to me, her expression soft but serious. "Matt," she said, setting her phone down and taking my hand, "I'm not her. And I know it's hard to fully trust again, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way she said it, with complete honesty and zero defensiveness. In that moment, I realized that the only thing standing between me and fully embracing this new chapter was me. I had to let go of the fear, the what-ifs, and trust not just Lena, but the person I'd become. From that point on, things shifted. I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop and started leaning into the present, appreciating what we had without the shadow of the past looming over us. And for the first time in a long time, I felt freed. A few months later, Lena and I decided to take a trip together, a week-long getaway to the mountains. It wasn't some grand romantic gesture, it was just us, unplugged from the world, hiking, cooking meals together, and sitting by the fire with no distractions. It was in those quiet, simple moments that I realized just how far I'd come. One night, as we sat on the cabin's porch, wrapped in blankets and watching the stars, Lena turned to me, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the moonlight. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked, her voice gentle but curious. That I paused, thinking about how loaded that question would have felt a year ago. Back then, the future felt like a void, something I was afraid to face. But now? Now it felt like an open road. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "I do. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of it." She smiled back, and in that moment, I knew that whatever the future held, I was ready for it. Not because I had all the answers, but because I'd finally learned to trust myself. To trust that no matter what happened, I could handle it. When we got back home, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened over the past year. Claire's betrayal had shattered me, but it had also forced me to confront parts of myself I'd been ignoring. It made me stronger, more resilient, and more in tune with what I wanted out of life. I even reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with over the years, people who reminded me of who I was before everything fell apart. It felt like I was rediscovering pieces of myself I didn't even realize I'd lost. One of those friends, Mark, invited me to join a local community group focused on mentoring young professionals in my field. At first, I was hesitant. I wasn't sure I was ready to take on that kind of responsibility. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I wanted to give back. If I could help someone else navigate their challenges, maybe even avoid some of the mistakes I'd made, then it was worth it. Mentoring turned out to be one of the most fulfilling things I'd ever done. It wasn't just about teaching others, it was about continuing to learn and grow myself. Every conversation, every piece of advice I gave, reminded me of how far I'd come and how much more there was to look forward to. Life wasn't perfect, but it felt right. And that's something I never thought I'd feel again after everything that happened with Claire. One evening, as Lena and I sat on the balcony of our apartment, watching the city lights flicker below, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said softly, "I'm really proud of you." I looked at her, feeling a warmth in my chest that went deeper than anything I'd felt before. "Because I was proud of me, too." "Thanks," I said, squeezing her hand. "But I couldn't have done it without you." She shook her head, smiling. "You did this, Matt. I was just here to remind you of who you are." And she was right. I had built this new life, piece by piece, from the rubble of the old one. And in doing so, I discovered a strength I never knew I had. As we sat there, the cool night air wrapping around us, I realized something profound. The past didn't define me. The betrayal didn't break me. It shaped me, yes, but it was up to me to decide what came next. And as far as I was concerned, the best chapters of my story were still ahead. By the time winter rolled around, I felt like I was finally living in a version of my life that made sense. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had stopped expecting perfection. I'd learned to appreciate the little things: quiet mornings with coffee and Lena, the hum of city life outside our window, and the steady rhythm of work and personal growth intertwining in ways I never imagined possible a year ago. But life, as it tends to do, had a few more surprises in store for me. One day at work, my boss called me into his office unexpectedly. I wasn't sure what to expect. Maybe another project, maybe feedback on the one I was wrapping up. But what he offered me left me speechless. "I've been impressed with your leadership over the past year, Matt," he said, leaning back in his chair. "There's an opening for a regional director position. It's a step up, a lot more responsibility, but it would mean relocating to New York." New York, the word echoed in my mind long after the meeting ended. A year ago, I would have jumped at the chance without hesitation. But now? Now things were different. I had built something here: a new life, new relationships, Lena. The idea of uprooting everything made my heart race, and not in the good way. I spent the next few days wrestling with the decision. Was I holding myself back by staying in Chicago, or was I finally grounded in something worth holding on to? I talked it over with Lena one night over dinner, expecting the conversation to be difficult, but, as always, Lena surprised me. "This is huge, Matt," she said, her eyes lighting up. "You've worked so hard for this. Don't pass it up because of me." I shook my head. "It's not just about you, Lena. It's about us. I don't want to lose what we've built here." She reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "We'll figure it out. Whether you take the job or not, we'll make it work. But don't let fear be the reason you say no." Her words stuck with me. I realized that fear had been guiding more of my decisions than I'd cared to admit. Fear of being hurt again, fear of losing what I'd rebuilt, fear of stepping into the unknown. But Lena was right. I couldn't let fear dictate my life. After a lot of soul-searching, I accepted the job. But instead of feeling like I was leaving something behind, it felt like I was taking everything I'd learned and carrying it forward. Lena and I decided to do long distance, at least for a while. It wasn't easy, but we both knew that if what we had was real, it would survive the distance. Moving to New York was like hitting the reset button all over again. A new city, new people, new challenges. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt invigorated. Every street I walked down, every project I tackled, was a reminder of how far I'd come. Of course, there were tough days. Days when I missed Lena so much it physically hurt. Days when the city felt too big, too impersonal, and I wondered if I'd made the right choice. But through it all, I held on to the lessons I'd learned. Life isn't about avoiding the hard stuff, it's about leaning into it, growing from it, and coming out stronger on the other side. Lena and I visited each other as often as we could, and every time we reunited, it felt like no time had passed at all. Our relationship didn't just survive the distance, it thrived in it. We learned to communicate better, to appreciate each moment we had together, and to support each other's individual growth. One weekend, during one of her visits to New York, we were walking through Central Park, the city buzzing around us, when she stopped suddenly. "You know," she said, looking up at me with that familiar spark in her eyes, "I never imagined life would take us here. But I'm really glad it did." I smiled, pulling her close. "Me too." In that moment, I realized that life wasn't about clinging to what's comfortable or certain. It was about embracing the unknown, trusting the journey, and knowing that no matter where it led, I'd be okay. Because I wasn't the same person I was when Claire left. I was stronger, wiser, and more confident in my ability to face whatever came next. Eventually, Lena decided to move to New York. We found a small apartment in Brooklyn, nothing fancy, but it felt like home. Not because of the place itself, but because we were building it together. As we unpacked boxes and settled into our new life, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened over the past couple of years. Claire's betrayal had felt like the end of the world at the time. But now, standing in this new chapter of my life, I saw it for what it really was, a beginning. If I could go back and change what happened, I wouldn't. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it shaped me into the person I am today. And that person? I'm proud of him. One evening, as Lena and I sat on our tiny balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked. That I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. "I used to. But now? I'm just grateful for where I am. For who I am." She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "Me too." And in that quiet moment, with the hum of the city around us and the future wide open ahead, I realized something profound. Life doesn't always go the way you plan. But sometimes, the detours lead you exactly where you're meant to be. A year later, life felt like it had finally clicked into place. I was living in New York, working a job that pushed me in the best ways, and sharing my life with Lena, a woman who showed me what real partnership looked like. We had our ups and downs, but everything about it felt grounded, honest, and real. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. One chilly afternoon, I was sitting in a coffee shop near my office, going over some notes for an upcoming presentation. The place was buzzing with the usual hum of conversation and clinking coffee cups when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, expecting to see a coworker or maybe someone from my building, but no. It was Claire. For a moment, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, her face a little more tired, but it was definitely her. The woman who had once been my entire world, standing there like a ghost from a past I thought I'd left behind. "Matt," she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "I didn't expect to see you here." I blinked, trying to process the surrealness of the moment. "Claire. Wow, it's been a while." She nodded, shifting awkwardly from one foot to the other. "Yeah, it has. Do you mind if I sit for a minute?" Part of me wanted to say no, to walk away and leave her standing there with all the unresolved tension between us. But another part of me, the part that had grown and healed, was curious. Not because I needed closure, but because I wanted to see if the past still held any power over me. "Sure," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. She sat down, and for a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of everything unsaid hanging in the air between us. "I heard you moved to New York," she finally said, breaking the silence. "Looks like you're doing well." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Yeah, I am. Life's good." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm glad to hear that." There was a pause, and then she took a deep breath. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I know I hurt you in ways I can't take back, and I've regretted it more than you'll ever know." I studied her face, looking for sincerity, and to my surprise, I found it. But instead of feeling the anger or bitterness I thought I would, I felt nothing. Just a quiet sense of detachment. "Thanks for saying that," I said simply. "But I've moved on. I'm happy now." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I can see that. And you deserve it, Matt. You always did." We sat there for another minute, the silence now less heavy, more like an acknowledgement that our chapter had truly closed. She stood up, gave me one last small smile, and walked away. As I watched her disappear into the crowd, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. Not because I needed her apology, but because I realized I didn't need anything from her anymore. The person I was when we were together was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. That evening, I told Lena about running into Claire. She listened quietly, her hand resting on mine as I recounted the unexpected encounter. "How do you feel about it?" she asked when I finished. I thought about it for a moment, then smiled. Relieved. Like a door I didn't even realize was still open finally closed. She squeezed my hand, her eyes warm and understanding. "I'm proud of you, Matt." And in that moment, I realized something profound. It wasn't Claire's betrayal that had defined me, it was how I chose to rise from it. The pain, the heartbreak, the uncertainty, they were all part of the journey that led me here. To this life. To this love. To this version of myself that I never would have discovered otherwise. Over the next few months, life continued to unfold in ways I hadn't expected. I got another promotion at work, Lena's freelance business took off, and we even adopted a scrappy little mutt named Max who quickly became the center of our world. But more than the external changes, it was the internal growth that mattered most. I wasn't just living, I was thriving. I'd learned to trust again, to open my heart without fear, and to embrace the unpredictability of life with open arms. One evening, as Lena and I walked Max through the bustling streets of Brooklyn, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" she asked. I chuckled, glancing down at Max as he trotted happily beside us. "All the time. It's hard to believe sometimes." She smiled, her eyes shining. "I'm glad you didn't let the past define you." I stopped walking, pulling her close. "I didn't. But it did shape me. And for that, I'm grateful." As we stood there, surrounded by the hum of city life and the warmth of each other's presence, I realized something profound. Life isn't about avoiding the storms, it's about learning to dance in the rain. And as far as I was concerned, the best dances were still to come.